For a decade, Emma had been rebuilding herself piece by piece after what Derek had destroyed. But at their high school reunion one evening, he attempted to destroy her all over again. Standing in front of their former classmates, his voice dripping with fake concern, he portrayed her as a loser, a former trophy wife who had sold her values for money and comfort. He believed he had her cornered, humiliated, and defeated. He was certain nobody would discover what really happened. What he didn't expect was that her new husband and her transformed life would arrive at that very moment. The invitation had been resting on the marble countertop in her kitchen for 3 weeks, a smooth, cream-colored piece of card that felt like a judgment. Brookhaven High School, class of 2014, 10-year reunion. Emma Sterling, no, she reminded herself, she was Emma Sinclair now, ran her well-groomed finger along the raised emblem, feeling that old familiar tightness in her belly. It wasn't the reunion gathering itself that made her anxious. It was him, Derek. Just his name felt like a missing piece of herself, a hurt where something used to exist, cut away but never truly gone. Her husband, Alexander Sinclair, entered the kitchen, his calm energy cutting through the chaos in her thoughts. He was built from a completely different foundation than Derek. Where Derek represented noisy, aggressive drive, Alexander embodied the steady, reliable power of something unmovable. He rested a hand on her shoulder, his touch soft, his look understanding. "You're dwelling on it again," he observed, his voice a deep, soothing sound. It wasn't phrased as a question. Emma released a breath she hadn't known she was holding in. This is absurd. Why do I keep giving him this control over me? The divorce was 6 years ago. Because injuries heal, Em, but the marks they leave stay behind. He was your first everything. That kind of connection doesn't simply vanish. Alexander's thumb traced a gentle pattern on her shoulder. He grasped more than most people the complicated layers of what she'd been through. He knew the version Derek presented to everyone else, the driven young attorney and his devoted, uncomplicated wife who simply couldn't match his pace. But Alexander understood what actually occurred, the endless put-downs, the mental manipulation, the systematic way Derek had torn apart her self-esteem until she barely existed in her own existence. "I don't want to attend," she said quietly, facing him. His eyes, a warm amber shade, showed no criticism, only a steady, constant love that still amazed her even after 3 years of being married. It sometimes seemed too wonderful to be real. "Then we'll stay home," he responded without hesitation. That was Alexander's way. He never forced anything. He provided safety, a peaceful refuge for her to rest. It was exactly that quality that motivated her to become braver. "No, I need to go. If I skip it, he gets what he wants. He'll tell everyone I was too frightened to appear, that I'm in hiding." She glanced around their kitchen, an expansive area of glass and metal with a view of Boston's glowing downtown from their high-rise residence. "He'll claim I'm hiding in my fancy prison." That last phrase came straight from Derek's final message to her, a hateful attack he'd sent when he discovered she was engaged to Alexander, a man whose financial status made Derek's biggest dreams look tiny. Derek had established an impressive reputation as a prominent trial attorney, but Alexander Sinclair possessed the type of inherited fortune that made people like Derek feel insignificant, and Derek despised feeling insignificant. "What he claims reflects who he is, not who you are," Alexander said softly, drawing her into a gentle hold. She breathed in his smell, sandalwood and fresh fabric, completely different from Derek's overpowering, costly cologne that always carried the scent of someone trying too hard. "In my head, I understand that," she admitted, her words muffled against his chest. "But in my heart, in my emotions, I'm still that 24-year-old woman who accepted everything he told me about myself, that I was fortunate to have him, that I lacked intelligence or drive or fascination on my own." The reunion evening approached like a storm moving in slow motion. Emma stood facing the tall mirror in their wardrobe room, a space bigger than the first place she'd shared with Derek. She had on a sapphire blue gown, an elegant, straightforward design that Alexander had selected. It was subtle, but the shade made her blue eyes brilliant, and the style suggested the power she'd developed, both physically and mentally. She had dedicated the previous 3 years to rediscovering the person Derek had attempted to delete. With Alexander's gentle support, she'd returned to university, completing the art history education she'd given up to fund Derek's law profession. She'd launched a modest but thriving consulting business, helping wealthy collectors with verifying and organizing their purchases. She was no longer just Derek's former wife or Alexander's spouse. She was Emma Sinclair, valued, knowledgeable, her own individual. So why did she feel like a fraud in her own body this evening? "You look stunning," Alexander's statement from the entrance startled her. He stood against the doorframe, already dressed in his suit, a flawlessly fitted Tom Ford creation that made him look less like a corporate executive and more like a film star. But his attention wasn't on the outfit. It was on her expression. "But you also look like you're preparing to face execution." She offered him a weak smile. "Feels the same." He approached, his hands settling on her waist. "He's going to attempt to hurt you, Em. He'll use our former friends as spectators. He'll play the victim role, the generous former husband who's so concerned about your well-being." He perfectly mimicked Derek's self-important tone. "He'll suggest you upgraded, that you're nothing except someone after money. He'll try to dismiss everything you've accomplished." "I know," she replied, her voice strained. "And how will you handle it?" Emma examined her mirror image, studying the woman looking back. The fear remained there, a slight shake behind her gaze. But beneath that, something else was awakening, a spark of resistance. The woman Derek wed would have fallen apart. The woman Alexander cherished was built from tougher material. "I'll keep smiling," she declared, her voice becoming stronger. "I'll remain courteous, and under no condition will I let him see me wounded." Alexander's mouth curved into a satisfied smile. He was scheduled to attend a charity event this evening, a previous obligation he couldn't cancel. He would meet her at the reunion afterwards if he managed to leave early. For the initial several hours, she would be alone. This was a challenge, her own personal mountain to climb. As the driver-operated vehicle moved through the city roads, every mile carried her closer to the Heritage Hills Club, the reunion location, and a decade backward in time. She gripped her compact evening purse, her knuckles turning white. This wasn't just about encountering Derek. It was about confronting the memories of who she'd been before and proving conclusively that the fancy prison wasn't actually a jail, but a stronghold she'd participated in creating. And this evening, for the first occasion, she felt ready to protect it. The Heritage Hills Club looked precisely as she remembered, a massive brick structure representing established wealth and restricting customs. The atmosphere inside the crystal ballroom felt heavy with memories of adolescent insecurities, now concealed by expensive fragrances, artificial smiles, and the subtle sound of career comparisons. It was a blend of nostalgia and disappointment, and Emma felt a surge of it as she walked through the entrance. For a brief moment, she stood motionless, an obvious target. Heads turned, murmurs spread like wildfire, and she felt the collective pressure of 10 years of rumors settling on her shoulders. "That's Emma Sterling, Derek's former wife. Did you hear who she's married to now?" Then a recognizable, comforting voice broke through the chatter. "Em, oh my goodness, you actually came!" Riley Chen, her closest friend since childhood, separated from a small cluster and wrapped her in a strong embrace. Riley, now a quick-witted children's doctor with 2 kids and a constantly exhausted but happy appearance, had been her anchor throughout the divorce. She was one of the rare people who had noticed the flaws in Derek's perfect image from the start. "I nearly stayed away," Emma confessed, her voice filled with anxiety. "Well, you look amazing. Like, take no prisoners, destroy everything amazing," Riley responded, holding her at a distance. "That shade on you is a statement." Emma produced a real smile. "It's my protection for tonight." "Perfect. You'll need it. The predator is commanding attention near the bar." Emma's eyes automatically tracked Riley's direction, and there he stood, Derek. He hadn't changed much in appearance. He retained that same light blonde hair, the muscular physique from his university football period, and the smile that could convince anyone of anything. He was encircled by an attentive crowd, former teammates, past cheerleaders, the people who had always revolved around him. He was motioning his hands with a glass of whiskey, his voice reaching across the space, filled with the smooth, rehearsed appeal that once mesmerized her. He hadn't noticed her yet. Her heart pounded in her chest like a trapped creature. "Breathe, Em, just breathe." "Come along," Riley urged, taking her hand and guiding her to a less crowded area. Let's get something to drink, and you can share everything about that art transaction in Florence. I need to experience life through someone who doesn't spend their workdays examining pictures of skin conditions." For the following hour, Emma succeeded in maintaining a deliberately created protective space. She and Riley reconnected with several genuinely pleasant individuals from their history: nerdy, kind Kevin Park, currently a prosperous app creator, and reserved, creative Emily Foster, that managed a successful flower arrangement company. The discussions were casual and comfortable. They discussed professions, children, the strangeness of aging. Emma discovered herself gradually unwinding, the tension in her stomach releasing its chokehold. Perhaps this wouldn't be terrible. Perhaps he would simply disregard her. It was a naive expectation. She witnessed the precise instant he spotted her. His grin wavered for a tiny second. His eyes, the light, cold blue she'd once considered so attractive, tightened slightly, a hunter identifying its target. He pardoned himself from his circle, his actions fluid and calculated as he started navigating through the gathering toward her. Riley pressed her arm. "Here we go," she whispered under her breath. "Remember your worth." Emma straightened her posture, her fingers gripping the chilled glass of her sparkling water more firmly. She wouldn't flee. She wouldn't disappear. "Emma, I almost didn't recognize you," Derek announced, halting before them. His voice was like silk wrapped around a knife. His eyes performed a slow, intentional examination of her appearance, from her designer shoes to her basic pearl earrings, pausing briefly on the sapphire and diamond ring Alexander had presented to her. It was an expression meant to be both admiring and contemptuous, as though he were evaluating livestock. "You clean up nicely." It was the identical backhanded praise he'd used for years. "You look presentable tonight, Em. It's remarkable what a bit of effort accomplishes." The former Emma would have blushed and stuttered. The current Emma held his stare without wavering. "Hello, Derek. You haven't changed one bit." She delivered the statement with a cool, impartial tone, allowing the uncertainty to linger in the atmosphere. A flash of irritation appeared on his expression, before he concealed it with his signature charm. "Still the same Derek, working diligently, doing the right thing." He directed his smile toward Riley. "Riley, wonderful to see you. How's your family?" He was performing the role of the gracious, amiable person, the mature individual. It was a strategic display for the people who were now discreetly observing their exchange. "We're doing well, Derek," Riley answered, her tone brief and distant. Derek's focus returned to Emma. "So, I understand congratulations are appropriate. You secured the big catch, Alexander Sinclair. That's remarkable. Must be pleasant not to stress about anything these days." The opening attack had been launched. It was refined, a deliberately phrased suggestion presented before their associates. "You didn't earn your lifestyle. You married into it." "I'm extremely content, Derek," Emma stated, plainly, declining to engage with his provocation. "Oh, I'm certain you are. It's quite different from our small apartment in Beacon Hill, correct?" He chuckled, a sound intended to seem shared and sentimental, but contained something harsh and resentful. "Remember when we used to save every coin to buy pizza on Friday evenings? I suppose you're dining off golden dishware now, right?" He was constructing his story piece by piece. He represented the down-to-earth person they all recalled, the individual who'd created his achievements from nothing. She was the person who had taken an easier route, who had forsaken their mutual past for an existence of unearned extravagance. He was establishing a power dynamic, portraying himself as the relatable champion and her as the removed, unknowable privileged class. "I remember our past very clearly, Derek," she responded, her voice lowering slightly, a trace of firmness entering her tone. "I remember every part of it." His smile fridged. He knew she wasn't solely discussing the pizza. She was referencing the nights she stayed up typing his legal documents, the valuable job opportunities she had declined so she could support his aspirations, the money from her grandmother that covered his bar exam costs, a contribution he had conveniently neglected to acknowledge. He was preparing to respond when someone patted him on the shoulder. It was Jake Matthews, the former quarterback and one of Derek's devoted followers. "Derek, buddy, we're about to begin toasts. You need to speak a few words." Derek's expression brightened. An audience, a microphone, it was his natural environment. He gave Emma a final, patronizing smirk. "You'll need to pardon me. Some of us still need to network." He turned and headed toward the platform, leaving Emma standing in the quiet, turbulent aftermath of his presence. Riley released a low whisper. "The self-absorbed individual has arrived, and he's preparing for a public attack." Emma watched him approach the stage, her blood turning icy. This was more severe than she had anticipated. He wasn't merely going to humiliate her in a private conversation. He was going to do it before everyone. The tapping of a knife against a champagne glass pierced through the ballroom's conversation, a sharp, demanding sound that commanded everyone's focus. Every head rotated toward the small temporary platform where Derek stood, illuminated in the comfortable radiance of a spotlight. He held a microphone in one hand and his partially empty glass of whiskey in the other, appearing completely like the person in charge. To anyone unfamiliar with him, he appeared confident, appealing, and entirely comfortable. Emma knew differently. She identified the aggressive shine in his gaze, the barely noticeable tension in his expression. This was Derek in his domain, a courtroom of his peers, and he served as both accuser and primary evidence. "Hey, everyone," he started, his voice echoing through the sound system. A wave of cheers and whistles responded to him. 10 years. Can you accept it? Some of us look slightly older. Some of us look slightly wealthier." He paused for laughter. "Some of us are just grateful to still be here." He was a master of suggestion. Every word was a deliberately selected stone thrown into the pool of collective perception to create waves of speculation. Emma stood stiff, Riley's hand a comforting, stabilizing touch on her back. She sensed the inquisitive looks of their classmates, their expressions a mixture of interest and sympathy. "I observed this room and I noticed numerous success accounts. Doctors, business owners, parents, individuals who have labored intensely to create something genuine, something they can take pride in." He consumed a drink of his whiskey, allowing the declaration to remain in the atmosphere. The underlying meaning was obvious. Real success is gained through hardship, not marriage. His stare found Emma again, this time holding it. He elevated his glass in a false salute. "And I want to offer a special acknowledgement to my former wife, Emma Sterling." A whisper traveled through the audience. It was bold, even for Derek, to address her by her previous name, to do it so openly. It was a strategic action to strip her of her current identity and pull her back into a history he dominated. "Some of you may not be aware, but Em and I were childhood sweethearts. We created a life together from nothing." He moved his head, a melancholy, wistful smile appearing on his mouth. "I invested everything I possessed into my career, into creating a future for us, and she was present beside me for a period." The phrase, "for a period," was filled with subtle poison. It suggested she had abandoned the mission, that she had lacked the determination to endure the challenge. Emma's hands formed fists at her sides. She felt the blood rushing in her ears. He was rewriting our past in real time, depicting himself as the industrious, abandoned husband. "Life directs us toward different paths," he continued, his voice overflowing with false generosity. Routes separate, people transform, and while my route was perhaps slightly steeper, slightly more difficult, I wouldn't trade the struggle for anything. It develops character. It teaches you about what's truly valuable. He was constructing a web, and she was positioned at its center. Every word was crafted to diminish her, to present her current contentment as superficial and undeserved. He was exploiting the classic stereotype of the fortune hunter, a story as ancient as history and just as powerful. He knew that in a room full of people who had dedicated the past decade ascending professional hierarchies and settling home loans, his story of determination would be much more relatable than her story of marrying a billionaire. A woman nearby, someone Emma dimly recognized as a cheerleader named Tiffany, murmured to her companion, just audible enough to be overheard, "Wow, I always wondered what happened with them. He seemed so devastated about it." Emma's stomach twisted. It was working. He was performing his magic, and they were all believing it. "But you know," Derek said, leaning toward the microphone, his voice lowering into a private, almost revealing tone, "I worry about her sometimes. I really do." He gazed directly at Emma now, his eyes brimming with a theatrical concern that made her skin feel uncomfortable. When you get everything without working for it, you can disconnect from reality. You can forget who you are, where you came from. You can forget the people who supported you when you had nothing. This was the opening attack. It wasn't a straight accusation, but a display of concern. It was a brilliant act of manipulation, presenting his cruelty as compassion. He wasn't attacking her. He was concerned about her. He represented the virtuous one, the caring former husband who just wanted what was best for her. The silence in the room was overwhelming. Everyone was observing her, anticipating her response. A tear, a contradiction, an irritated explosion. Any emotional display would be a triumph for him, confirmation that his statements had achieved their target. Emma inhaled a slow, intentional breath. She recalled Alexander's statements. "He will attempt to dismiss everything you've created." She recalled her own commitment. "I will not allow him to witness me hurt." She elevated her chin slightly. She didn't avert from Derek's stare, and she performed something he didn't anticipate. She smiled. It wasn't a broad smile, not a joyful one. It was small, peaceful, and completely mysterious. It was the smile of a woman who possessed a secret he couldn't possibly understand. Her absence of response appeared to destabilize him. He had anticipated a fracture in her composure, an indication of vulnerability he could take advantage of. He observed nothing. He wavered for a moment, his folksy appeal disappearing, exposing the genuine hostility underneath. He regained control quickly, concluding his tribute with a dramatic gesture. "So, here's to the class of 2014, to hard work, to genuine success, and to never neglecting who you are." A scattered applause interrupted the tension, but it was uncertain. Derek had exceeded slightly. The assault had been too personal, too direct. He had made individuals uneasy, but the harm was complete. The opening attack had been delivered, and Emma understood it was only a question of time before the remaining crowd felt encouraged to contribute theirs. Derek's tribute had transformed the environment of the space. It was as though he'd tugged a thread that started to dismantle the courteous social structure of the evening. The atmosphere, previously filled with pleasant remembering, was now loaded with the electrical buzz of rumors. Emma felt like a specimen behind glass, the focus of countless silent discussions. The murmurs were present everywhere, careful but noticeable. She could observe them in the rapid sideways looks, the heads inclined together in secretive groups, the abrupt quiets that descended when she passed a cluster. Riley, fiercely devoted, attempted to interfere. "Don't pay attention to them, Em. They're scavengers. They survive on this material." But the criticisms were difficult to disregard. They were refined, presented not in direct charges, but in the careful structure of inquiries. "Emma, it's so pleasant to see you." It was Vanessa Whitmore, a woman who had reached her peak in high school as the popular leader and now appeared frantic to maintain any trace of social importance. Her smile was broad, but her eyes were keen and investigating. We were all so astonished to learn about you and Derek. You two appeared so flawless. And then, incredible, Alexander Sinclair. What a rapid development that must have been. The suggestion was transparent. How did someone like you obtain someone like him so rapidly? It's been a beautiful 3 years, Emma responded steadily, declining to provide additional details. Her conciseness was a defense, but Vanessa perceived it as a confrontation. I can envision. I noticed your photograph in Boston Metropolitan last winter from that hospital fundraising event, the Sinclair Foundation, correct? It must be extraordinary participating in that world, so unlike, bake sales and school association gatherings. Vanessa's laugh was thin. It was a typical mean girl approach, false appreciation while simultaneously emphasizing their apparent distinctions to establish a sense of separation. She was reminding everyone that Emma no longer fit into their community. Before Emma could respond, Travis Bennett, one of Derek's previous football companions, approached casually, a beer in his hand and a satisfied expression on his face. Sterling or Sinclair? I suppose Derek was just sharing with us about the previous days. Man, we were poor back then, but we experienced enjoyment, didn't we? Nothing compares to receiving your first genuine paycheck, He patted Derek, who had conveniently materialized, on the back. This person's a champion in the courtroom. Established his company from zero. You must be so satisfied with him. The question was a calculated jab, meant to push her into an uncomfortable situation. If she agreed, she confirmed Derek. If she opposed, she appeared resentful. Derek's drive was always one of his characteristic qualities, she stated, her voice a deliberately polished surface. It was the truth, but removed of any warmth. Derek wrapped an arm around Travis's shoulders, playing the role of the generous leader. Oh, that's ancient past, Travis. We've all moved on to bigger and superior things. He glanced at Emma. Some of us simply had to ascend a higher ladder to arrive there. The whispers intensified, the criticisms more distinct. Each exchange was a small paper slice, minor on its own, but together they were starting to drain her determination. Derek had effectively contaminated the environment. He had established the narrative, and now his supporters were reinforcing it. They perceived him as the self-made man, the relatable person from their mutual history. They perceived her as an outsider who had exchanged her position for an easy life. The most hurtful aspect was the silencing of those who should have known better. Individuals she had regarded as friends, individuals who had visited her and Derek's first residence, who had witnessed her laboring at 2 occupations to sustain them while he was in law school. They now stood inactive, their expressions turned away, reluctant to oppose Derek's interpretation of events. Their silence was a form of participation, a silent agreement of his cruelty. It fueled her strongest fear, that Derek had been accurate all along, that she was unremarkable, minor, her efforts readily deleted from history. She withdrew to a small vacant table in the corner, requiring a moment to breathe. The ballroom felt like it was compressing around her, the cheerful music a taunting contrast to the chaos in her chest. She observed Derek operate the space, laughing, shaking hands, receiving pats on the back. He was radiating with a winner's assurance. He wasn't merely humiliating her, he was gathering support, reinforcing his social position at her expense. This was his hidden purpose, she understood. It wasn't solely about injuring her, it was about power. In their small mutual community of Brookhaven High graduates, he was reestablishing his supremacy. He was resolving a conflict that had nothing to accomplish with their marriage and everything to accomplish with his own delicate pride, which had been injured by her marrying a man significantly more accomplished than he could ever aspire to be. A figure approached her table, and she prepared herself for another assault. But it was Kevin Park, the reserved tech creator from earlier. He held 2 bottles of water, offering one to her. I thought you might need this, he said, his eyes compassionate. Thank you, Kevin. I remember how you used to help me with my calculus assignments in the library, even when you were overwhelmed with your own responsibilities, he mentioned, sitting down. And I remember you lending me $20 for a concert ticket when my father had suspended my allowance. You were always one of the good ones, Em. His simple act of kindness was a rescue rope in an ocean of criticism. It was a reminder that not everyone had believed Derek's deceptions. "He's telling everyone I'm some kind of supported woman," she said, her voice shaking slightly. Kevin made a dismissive sound. "Anyone who believes that is a fool. Derek was always good at making himself look superior by making other people look inferior. Some things never change." Their peaceful conversation was a temporary relief, but it was disrupted by the booming of Derek's voice again. He was returning to the platform, a new drink in his hand. "All right, everyone, calm down," he announced. "A few of us were just conversing, and we thought it would be funny to share some 'where are they now' accounts. But let's make it interesting. Let's discuss our greatest failure on the journey to success, because that's where the actual education occurs, correct?" His eyes found Emma across the space, and a slow, cruel smile spread across his expression. He was increasing the pressure, preparing to present the final attack. He was going to transform her life into a warning story. Derek's new activity was a brilliant demonstration of psychological warfare. By presenting it as a conversation of failure, he gave himself permission to be severely personal under the appearance of sincere reflection. He initiated with a self-critical account about his first unsuccessful business attempt, a lawn-cutting operation in high school that enchanted the audience and reinforced his reputation as a relatable, humble person. Then he transferred the microphone to several of his friends who shared sanitized stories about unsuccessful investments or career errors, all with neat, positive conclusions. It was all a deliberately assembled introduction, a preparation for the main performance. Emma watched, her anxiety rising with each speaker. She knew the microphone was moving with intention, a tool being passed from hand to hand until it arrived at its designated target. The room was a pressure vessel, and she was positioned at its core. Eventually, Derek retrieved the platform. "This has been excellent, everyone, a true instruction in perseverance." He paused, his face changing to one of profound, melancholy reflection. "But it makes me think of a different kind of failure, not a business failure, but a personal one." He gazed out across the audience, his attention sweeping past Emma as though he were simply addressing the room generally, but the focus of his energy was unmistakable. "You can have all the success in the universe, but it doesn't mean much if you abandon yourself along the journey. I once knew someone who had so much potential, so—" Failure? Derek consumed hard. "Just some former friends exchanging stories. You understand how it is." "I'm not certain I do," Alexander responded, his tone still gentle, almost conversational. "My wife is one of the most resilient and brave individuals I have ever encountered. Her definition of achievement might vary from yours. You see, she evaluates it not by the commotion you create, but by the peaceful integrity with which you construct a life. Not by the aspirations you loudly announce, but by the ones you peacefully, persistently accomplish." Each word was a precise surgical incision, dismantling the very foundation of the story Derek had so carefully assembled. He wasn't simply defending Emma, he was redefining the conditions of the complete discussion. Emma stared at him, her heart expanding with a sensation so enormous she could barely contain it. He hadn't charged in, fists ready. He hadn't generated a scene. He was defending her with his intelligence, his dignity, and his constant belief in her. He was displaying everyone in the space the man he was, and in doing so, he was displaying them the woman he perceived when he gazed at her. The observers were mesmerized. This was a drama far more engaging than Derek's self-pitying speech. It was a peaceful, lethal conflict of two vastly different types of authority. One was noisy, insecure, and constructed on the domination of others. The other was peaceful, absolute, and established in conviction. "I believe," Alexander stated, his stare eventually releasing Derek and shifting to the remainder of the space, a trace of steel now beneath his tranquil tone, "that the performance is finished." He then gazed back at Emma, his expression transforming once more. "Shall we get some fresh air?" He didn't wait for a response. Maintaining her hand securely in his, he started to guide her away from the toxic center of the space. The audience once more divided for them. They advanced past the astonished expressions, the open mouths, the awakening understanding in the eyes of their classmates. As they arrived at the entrances, Emma risked one final glance back. Derek was standing isolated, his previous audience having subtly moved away, not desiring to be connected with the defeated side. He appeared deflated, his cheap triumph having turned to dust in his mouth. For the first occasion that evening, he appeared precisely like what he was, a bully who had just been positioned in his place. The cool evening atmosphere was a comfort on Emma's heated skin. Alexander guided her through a set of French entrances onto a vacant stone terrace overlooking the Gulf area. The groomed green, immersed in the silvery illumination of the moon, was a landscape of flawless, ordered tranquility, a universe away from the social combat zone inside. For a lengthy moment they stood in quiet, the distant sound of the gathering a muted pulse behind them. Emma eventually released a trembling breath, the tension of the past several hours releasing from her body in a surge. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice heavy with emotion. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," Alexander stated, facing her, his hands finding hers and holding them softly. "I will not remain inactive and permit someone to speak about my wife that way, ever." "He made me feel so small," she admitted, the embarrassment of it still attached to her. "For a minute there, I nearly believed him. I nearly believed I was that individual he described." "He described a phantom," Alexander stated, his voice solid, "a fabrication he established to comfort his own pride. The woman I observe is a brilliant art advisor who single-handedly arranged the acquisition of a Monet for one of the most challenging collectors in the universe. The woman I observe is a partner, my most trusted counselor. The woman I observe just obtained a position on the board of the Children's Literacy Foundation. A phantom couldn't accomplish that, Em. Only a formidable woman could." He was listing her achievements not as a defense, but as a declaration of reality. He was presenting a mirror, compelling her to observe the reflection he perceived, the truth that Derek's hatred had attempted to hide. Just then, the French entrances opened once more. It was Derek. His face was a mask of anger. The public humiliation had intensified, and his need for confrontation had surpassed any sense of self-protection. "I require to speak to you," he growled, directing a finger at Emma. "Alone." Alexander stepped forward slightly, a subtle but impossible barrier. "I don't believe so." "This is between me and her," Derek demanded, his voice raising. "This is about our background. You have no concept what we experienced." "Oh, but I believe I do," Alexander stated, his tone deepening to a dangerously peaceful level. The tranquil conversationalist was gone, replaced by a man of cold, hard command. "I know, for instance, about the inheritance your wife received from her grandmother, the one that covered your law school tuition and bar exam fees, an inheritance that was never repaid, not even acknowledged. I suppose that was portion of the struggle you constructed your profession on." Derek's jaw dropped limp. He appeared as if Alexander had struck him. How did you know that?" "When I fell in love with Emma, I made it my purpose to understand everything she had been through. I know about the job proposal she had from the Art Institute of Boston, the one you persuaded her to decline because it would have required her to travel, and you required her home to type your legal documents and arrange dinners for your colleagues. You called it a sacrifice for our future, an intriguing term for sabotaging your wife's profession to advance your own." Emma stared at Alexander, astonished. She had told him these things, of course, in quiet, tearful admissions over the years, but to hear them presented so clinically, so factually, as evidence in a case against Derek, was breathtaking. Alexander hadn't simply listened to her pain, he had documented the injustices. "And I know," Alexander continued, his voice relentless, "that after your first big case, when you bought yourself a Porsche, you told Emma there wasn't enough money left for her to enroll in the master's program she'd been admitted to, even though the tuition was less than a quarter of the cost of your vehicle." Derek was pale, stumbling backward a step. "That's not... It was more complicated than that." "Was it?" Alexander interrupted. "Or was it simply that your success required her failure, that for you to feel important, she had to be kept small?" Alexander took a step nearer, and for the first occasion, Garrick appeared genuinely frightened. "You didn't just divorce her, Mr. Chambers. You attempted to systematically dismantle her, her confidence, her ambition, her sense of self-worth. You speak of a gilded prison, but the only prison Emma was ever in was the one you constructed for her, brick by brick, with your insults, your condescension, and your enormous selfishness." The truth, presented in Alexander's cold, precise delivery, was more condemning than any angry shout. It absorbed all the oxygen from the terrace. Derek stood revealed, not as a wronged former husband, but as a petty, emotional abuser. His hidden objectives were no longer hidden. They were exposed for all to observe. It was never about love or background. It was about jealousy, the professional jealousy of a man who resented his wife's capability, and the personal bitterness of a man who couldn't tolerate to see her happy and flourishing with someone else. "So, you are accurate," Alexander concluded, his voice transforming slightly as he shifted his stare back at Emma. "This is about your past, and I am here to guarantee that past no longer has the power to harm her." He then gazed back at Derek, his expression of finality and dismissal. "You are a footnote in my wife's account, Mr. Chambers. I recommend you learn to accept that." With that, Alexander took Emma's hand, turned his back on the stammering, defeated man, and guided her away from the terrace, leaving Derek alone with the wreckage of his own deceptions. It wasn't a noisy triumph, it was a peaceful one. A peaceful defense that had thundered like a lion. When Alexander and Emma entered back into the ballroom, the atmosphere was charged. The confrontation on the terrace hadn't been witnessed, but the shift in authority that happened when Alexander arrived was still noticeable. Derek stumbled in a moment later, his face pale, his confidence completely gone. He looked like a deflated balloon, and the sight of his defeat was a truth more powerful than any gossip. He avoided everyone's eyes, making a direct path for the bar where he drank a glass of whiskey in one swallow. The enchantment was shattered. The story Derek had so carefully crafted had been destroyed. People who were rapid to offer him sympathy and join in the criticism of Emma now seemed uncertain, their loyalties shifting in the presence of a new, undeniable reality. They started to see Emma differently, not with sympathy, but with a growing respect. They were seeing her not through Derek's contaminated perspective, but as the woman who stood beside Alexander Sinclair, her equal in grace and peaceful strength. Riley and Kevin Park rushed over, their faces beaming. That was, trying to find the correct word, biblical. I've wanted to see someone put him in his place for 10 years. Kevin just shook his head in admiration. He didn't even raise his voice. But the genuine accounting was yet to arrive. It wouldn't arrive from Alexander. It would arrive from Emma herself. Strengthened by Alexander's constant defense, experiencing the ground solid beneath her feet for the first occasion all evening, she experienced a profound change within her. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, clear anger. An anger not simply at Derek, but at herself for ever permitting him to persuade her she was less than she was. She observed Vanessa Whitmore and Travis Bennett, two of Derek's most vocal supporters, gathered near the appetizers table, casting nervous glances in her path. The former Emma would have disregarded them, would have been satisfied with her private triumph. The current Emma, the woman Alexander perceived, advanced directly toward them. They fell quiet as she neared, their discomfort obvious. Vanessa, Emma started, her voice tranquil and steady. "You referenced earlier how distinct my existence must be now. You're correct, it is. For instance, my husband doesn't perceive my aspirations as a threat to his own. He doesn't inform me my enthusiasms are foolish hobbies. He celebrates my achievement instead of attempting to destroy it. That's the primary distinction, not the money." Vanessa's expression flushed a deep, blotchy red. She opened her mouth to speak, but no statements emerged. Then Emma shifted to Travis. "And Travis, you stated you were satisfied with Derek for constructing his company from the ground up. You should understand the initial money for that company came from my grandmother's inheritance, an investment I made in him because I accepted in him, an investment he conveniently neglects to reference when he's sharing his heroic origin account." Travis gazed at the floor, at the ceiling, anywhere except at Emma. The truth of her statements, presented without malice but with unshakable conviction, had the undeniable resonance of authenticity. She wasn't completed. Her voice elevated slightly, not in a shout, but sufficient to attract the focus of those standing nearby. "For years, I permitted Derek to define me. I permitted his voice to become the only voice I could hear in my head. He informed me I was weak, so I experienced weak. He informed me I was nothing without him, and I accepted him." She gazed across the space at Derek, who was observing the scene develop, trapped and powerless. But he was incorrect. The statements were straightforward, but they resonated with the intensity of a revelation. It was her declaration of independence, spoken not simply to the space, but to the phantom of the woman she used to be. "My existence didn't start when I encountered Alexander Sinclair. It started when I departed Derek Chambers. Everything I possess because I eventually started accepting in myself. The love and support of a decent man was the fortunate assistance, but I was the one who learned to soar once more." Her speech was received with an astonished quiet. She had not only defended herself, she had reclaimed her own account. She had accepted the ugly, twisted story Derek had established and ignited it on fire. In its place, she had presented them the truth, and it was far more compelling. The accounting was peaceful, but absolute. It was in the embarrassed expressions of those who had been so rapid to criticize her. It was in the newfound respect in the eyes of her former classmates. It was in the way Vanessa couldn't meet her stare, and Travis suddenly found his shoes fascinating. And then a sound interrupted the quiet. Applause. It initiated with Riley and Kevin, but it expanded. Emily Foster, the florist, started to clap. A few others participated. It wasn't a thunderous celebration, but a wave of support, an acknowledgement of her bravery. Alexander had been standing back, permitting her to possess her moment. Now he approached to her side, his eyes shining with pride. He accepted her hand and pressed it. Emma Sterling Sinclair gazed around the space at the expressions of the individuals she had grown up with. She was no longer a phantom here. She was genuine, she was complete, and she was eventually free. The reunion was no longer a dangerous place. It was simply a space full of individuals, and she was no longer frightened. Emma's account is a powerful reminder that our history doesn't have to define our future. It demonstrates that genuine strength isn't about never falling down. It's about possessing the bravery to stand back up and reclaim your own story. She battled back against the deceptions, not with anger, but with the peaceful dignity of the truth, demonstrating that the most powerful voice you can possess is your own. Her journey from a gilded prison to an existence of authentic freedom is an inspiration to anyone who has ever felt small. If this account of betrayal, redemption, and the incredible power of self-worth resonated with you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who requires to hear it, and subscribe for more emotional accounts that feel like real life.